Welcome to the Idiot Cargo Connection with 10 Furlongs Magazine. I'm your host today, Aurelian, and today we're going to speak to Jamie Walter of Proven Thoroughbreds, owners of not one but two Everest contenders. Hi, Jamie.
Aurelian, how are you?
I'm doing very well, thank you. I hope you're doing
Welcome,
well.
welcome to Australia by Zoom.
That's right. Welcome back. That's cool. All right. So the first of one of Australian most popular sprinter, the Group 1 winning Think About It. We're going to talk a lot about it.
Yes.
Who will represent the GPI Racing and Newgate Farm slot in the 2023 Everest. And also, of course, the very famous Private Eye who placed second in the 2022 Everest, denying Nature's Strip, if I'm not mistaken.
That's absolutely right. And our Private Eye as yet hasn't secured a slot.
Oh yeah, it hasn't secured the slot yet.
Not yet, but if his lead-up form is as good as we hope, then I would think he'll have a few admirers because he ran second last year, beaten a very narrow margin.
That sounds quite incredible, for sure.
Yes.
Very well. So, Jamie, first of all, I want to congratulate you on the slot for the Everest Cup. That one.
Thank you very much, Aurelian.
Good, yes. So can you give us some insight into the process of securing that prestigious spot and how it feels really to be part of such a high stakes race once again?
Okay, well, probably to understand the way this unfolded for Think About It.
Sure.
Last year, by comparison, Private Eye didn't secure a slot until very late. In fact, he only got a slot when Snap Dancer went sore, so Inglis's required a horse. And fortunately, our horse stepped up to the plate and won impressively first up. So he was a pretty obvious choice at that point. Now, this year, we've secured a slot some months out from the race. And that's a different experience because it's all secured and in place, assuming, of course, the horse is fitting well on the day. And it's kind of a nice feeling because there's no pressure.
Can you imagine?
To secure a berth. That's all been secured. It's pretty much now up to the horse.
Mm-hmm. That's true.
In terms of how it unfolded, well, look, we had a little bit of interest from Newgate / GPI. I had conversations with both Greg Ingham and Henry Field of Newgate Farm. And initially, conversations were around Private Eye. Then Private Eye, at his most recent run in Brisbane, he slightly disappointed. So then, simultaneously, Think About It was on an upward spiral, and he became the centre of the conversations.
For sure. That's amazing. Very good. And how important is it for you and also, of course, for Proven Thoroughbreds to be part of this journey again?
Well, William, to answer that, one has to really understand how the Everest has impacted Australian racing in its, well, I think it's only been going 5 or 6 years. It's been profound, to say the least, because an old traditionalist like me, when the Everest was first mooted, I was a little bit dubious. I thought, another 1,200 metre sprint had a sort of an air of gimmickry about it, and particularly with the slot holders owning the positions, kind of smacked at the big end of town, just shuffling the chairs. However, I've had to completely do a 360-degree turn. And to be fair, I had done that before we got a birth last year, because the intrigue that the general public feel in the build-up to this race is quite extraordinary.
I can imagine.
What horses ex-slot holder going to choose? You know, will they choose it if it runs well in this lead-up, and etc., etc. So it attracts a lot of interest, just the final makeup of the field. And then in the week of the race, there's barrier draws and what have you, and track conditions. And the day of the race is big, because we have a full house at Randwick, which doesn't occur very often, Aurelian.
Okay.
Probably annually, I think.
Okay, yeah, sure.
So it's a really exciting thing, and it's made a big impact.
Okay.
Notwithstanding the fact that the pattern committee haven't been able to yet concur sufficiently to render it a Group 1. Now, it's a Group 1 in every sense of the word, bar the official sanction of the pattern committee. But it is a very, very high-level race, and will be a Group 1 inevitably in the fullness of time.
That seems really incredible. It brings a lot of conversation, I can imagine, and people also together, and then sure.
It does indeed, and for someone like myself who's a syndicator, and we have 20, 25 people in most of our horses.
Okay.
It's amazing how the race touches so many people, because you can think of those 25 people, they've all got friends and family and work colleagues, and that all contributes to the mainstream interest in the race. And I think that's probably synonymous with Australian racing, period. The sport in this country has mainstream appeal, unlike perhaps the US, where it's more niche.
Exactly.
Just like everything in the US is big.
Well, that's quite true also.
But it's niche compared to other sports.
Definitely. Very good. Just to move on to the next question that I have. So we've heard that you have a strong relationship with Newgate Farm. Could you give me some light on how this came about?
Well, Henry Field, who's the driving force behind Newgate Farm, it's a relatively young farm by Australian studs standing. And they've had a huge impact on the marketplace. They're standing 12 or 15 stallions now. And Henry's been the driving force behind that rapid rise of Newgate Farm. And I've known Henry personally for a number of years, not closely, but known of him and known to say hello. And I've really liked the way Newgate has developed as a farm. And I'm a buyer in the marketplace, and they're big sellers of yearlings. They have big drafts of the Magic Millions and Easter and Classic and most of the major sales in Australia. So Henry and I move in each other's orbit for, quite a deal of the year, whether it's at the races or the sales. And we exchange pleasantries and opinions. So that's probably how the connection with Newgate was formed. But they, of course, bred this horse. Think about it.
How do you think it has contributed to your success in that, industry, in the racing industry?
The connection with Newgate?
Yes.
Oh, look, I don't know whether it's singularly contributed to our success. They're a successful farm,
Mm-hmm.
and as a buyer in the market we buy sort of 25, 30 horses a year, we're obviously looking at every yearling that comes onto the market, and Newgate have quite a few of those. So it's not often that a year would pass where we don't buy from Newgate.
Okay.
But, we obviously buy from farms all over Australia. So.
Fair enough. All right, let's talk a little bit about Think About It. So
obviously, hard to do that already.
Sorry?
You mightn't be able to shut me up.
Well, I'm not sure about that. So obviously, as the owner of Think About It, how do you feel about having him selected for the Everest 2022 so early in the game? 2022? 2023. Yes, that's what I thought.
Look, obviously, it's very exciting, as I mentioned earlier, to have a horse like him secured. And he's so lightly raced. He's only had 10 starts and he's won 9 of them. He's a very exciting horse.
Amazing.
Very exciting horse. And funnily enough, he's by So You Think, who's more a sort of middle distance sire, out of a mare by Flying Spur whose mother was in turn out by Zabeel. So he's not really bred to be a sprinter. There is some speedy horses, or there are some speedy horses in his pedigree, but to look at the horse physically and to look at his pedigree would suggest that he's a middle distance horse. And he still might be already. We're still learning about him. So at this point in the horse's life, the world's his oyster. We don't know what his optimum distance is going to be and where or when he's going to stop winning.
Of course. Well,
it'll be soon enough. I keep telling the owners.
Hopefully not.
but look, he's a very exciting horse, and it's terrific to have him in such a great race.
Wow. That sounds great. Thank you so much. So for sure, it's definitely be an amazing horse. And this question is a bit out of the box, so get ready for that one.
I'm bracing myself, Aurelian.
Sorry?
I'm bracing myself.
Yeah, that's going to be quite a bit of a different question. I'm not sure if anyone asked you that question before. So if Think About It were a person, how would you describe his characteristic and personality?
High energy.
Oh, interesting.
In fact, Joe Pride, the trainer, jokingly said to me, he may have ADHD.
Well, that sums the question pretty well.
And look, people who've seen him at the races, they wouldn't be surprised to hear that description, because he's very, very energetic before a race. When he's in the tie-up stalls, he's beautifully relaxed. But once the saddle goes on, he starts to get excited.
Oh.
Excited, not anxious. There's a difference. So it's not like he breaks out into a lather of sweat. He just gets on his toes and is almost saying to you, let me at him. I just want to get out there and go for it.
And just win.
Hopefully, yes.
Which he does pretty well.
He's doing a good job of it at the moment.
He's doing a very good job, for sure. That's very good. What do you think sets him apart from the other racehorses?
It's a
Maybe
good,
horses you had in the past. Or,
okay. Well, Private Eye, for example, probably has a sharper turn of foot than Think About It. Think About It tends to surge as opposed to unleash a brilliant sprint. And I was talking to the jockey, Sam Clipperton, about this. And Sam said he seems to be able to maintain top speed for longer than most horses. Which, and I shouldn't even draw this comparison, but I'm going to anyway.
go for it.
I can remember Hugh Bowman interviewed about Winx. And he was asked something similar, what's the distinguishing feature of Winx? And he said, most racehorses can sprint for 100, 150 metres. Winx, 400. So you can imagine top-class thoroughbred that can sprint for that distance. It's a weapon. It's a big weapon.
For sure.
And it's, wash my mouth out with soap for even referring to Winx and Think About It in the one breath. But one can hope, and the way he races is very much that surging manner. He just can build into the race and then just maintain this high level for quite a while.
Wow. That definitely helps on the track, on the race.
Big advantage, Aurelian, yes.
Definitely, I can imagine. Let's talk a bit about the sale. The sale. So you purchased Think About It for about 70,000 Australian dollars as a yearling.
That's right.
How did that happen?
Okay, he was sold in Melbourne, and both Joe and I went to Melbourne, and we tend to look at the horses separately, but we do like to work very much in tandem. So we'll then compare our shortlists, and when they overlap, we think, well, here's a horse we should be bidding on. Mm-hmm. And then we have to agree on price and get a veterinary tick and things like that. But I can remember when we bought this horse, it had been a busy year. I'd bought a lot of horses. And both Joe and I returned to Sydney before the end of the sale. And in fact, before Think About It had been sold, or was being sold the day I left. And when I returned to Sydney, there was a missed call from Jim Carey, who's the yearling manager from Newgate. And I kind of knew what he'd be talking about because Joe and I had gone back to look at Think About It a few times. Hence they knew we were interested. Anyway, Jim, I called him back and he said, look, we passed that So You Think colt in. And I said, oh, okay. Clearly, not having bothered bidding on it, I was only modestly interested because, as I say, I'd already bought a lot of horses that year. Anyway, I rang Joe and he said, you know, he liked the horse and I liked the horse. So we agreed to put in a bid. It was passed in for 100,000. We rang back, bid 70, and it was accepted. So
Wow.
we were pretty lucky,
Mhm.
or it could have gone to someone else ever so easily.
That seems pretty lucky indeed. Indeed.
So it wasn't a question of, oh, he was the knockout horse, he was the horse we had to have. It was nothing like that.
Oh, wow.
He was a,
Interesting.
he was a
Yeah.
backward, immature horse
Bit of
who was
luck.
obviously going to need time. Yeah.
That's amazing. Very nice. And what kind of plans do you have for think about it, like leading towards, the Everest Cup in terms of training, preparation?
He'll have one run.
Sorry.
He'll have one run, one lead-up run,
Okay.
the Premier Stakes, a fortnight before the Everest. And prior to the Premier Stakes, you'll have 2 barrier trials. And that'll be it.
Oh, that's it. Okay. Interesting. And what about after the Everest? Any plan already in mind or?
Well, the race that Private Eye won last year, which was called the Nature Strip Stakes because it's named after the previous year's winner of the Everest. So this year it'll be called the Giga Kick Stakes. That's pretty obvious next step to go to because it's 1,300 metres at Rose Hill, a fortnight after the Everest, and it's worth, I think, about 4 million or something. So it's pretty tidy purse. So I would imagine we'd go for that, Aurelian.
Okay, perfect. That's pretty good. Right, and let's talk a little bit about Private Eye to change the topic. So, Private Eye is a horse with about 10 wins and
Yes.
6 million Australian dollars in earnings.
Yes.
What are your plans for him, especially this season?
Well, we brought him back a little earlier because he had a slight issue with one knee last preparation. Just some wear and tear. So in order to try and secure an Everest berth, he's going to have 2 lead-up runs. He's going to run in the shorts over 1,100, then a fortnight into the Premier, and then hopefully a fortnight into the Everest. But he will have to run well in at least one, if not both of those races to A, justify getting a berth and to warrant running. If he's not running well, there's no point persisting.
At what point did you feel that was the right horse for the Everest?
Private Eye?
Uh-huh.
When we got the call from Ingles's last year. That was the first time. Because already in his best form was really over a mile. He'd won the Epsom over 1,600 metres, a Group 1 handicap, the previous spring in Sydney. And he'd won the Queensland Guineas, Group 2, 1,600 metres. He'd even run in the McKinnon Stakes over 2,000 metres the previous spring. So we didn't really have him pegged as a sprinter per se, even though, as I referred to earlier, he does have a sharp turn of foot and he tends to race very well fresh. So we sprinted brilliantly to win the Gilgai Stakes, and we were subsequently offered the Everest bid. Whilst we were eager to accept it because of the prestige and the just the thrill of being involved in the race, we were delighted. Didn't really fancy our chances because we thought he might need further than 1,200 after sprinting well fresh. But he ran the race of his life and he was only beaten a narrow margin by Giga Kick. I thought he was going to win it for about 2 seconds or 2 strides.
So we were talking about Private Eye and how did you feel um, being the right horse for the Everest?
Yes, we really didn't think about the Everest for him
Okay.
because his best form was over 1,600 metres. He'd won the Group 1 Epsom at that distance, the Group 2 Queensland Guineas at 1,600. He had won shorter races when he was going through his classes, but we didn't really think of him as a top-class sprinter. And it was only after he won the Gilgai Stakes, which is a Group 2, brilliantly first up, that he came to the attention of the general marketplace in regards to the Everest. And fortuitously, Kieran Maher's horse went sore, which left an available space. And I guess once that happened, we were the obvious choice. There really wasn't another leading contender for that position.
It was a little bit of a gamble, would you say?
Well, it wasn't our decision, really. All we had to do was say yes. It was Inglis's gamble. It was Inglis's gamble, but we were quite happy to come along for the ride.
That sounds great. That sounds good. Very well. I'm very curious to ask you about the Sydney Spring Carnival. What do you think of this newly created Sydney Spring Carnival?
Well, Aurelian, I think credit where credit's due. Peter V'landys, who runs Racing New South Wales and has been the architect of a revamped Sydney Spring Carnival. They've done a fabulous job because for most of my life, the Sydney Spring Carnival would finish on the first weekend of October. And then all eyes would lead to Melbourne, all roads would lead to Melbourne, all the good horses would go to Melbourne, and Sydney racing would just fall away. But Peter V'landys rightly surmised that this area in October and November, which was between the football and cricket seasons, was invaluable television time, spectator time for Australian sport. And he felt Melbourne shouldn't necessarily have it to themselves. And you know what? He's absolutely right. Because both cities' carnivals have flourished in the time since New South Wales Spring has been revamped. And as far as spectators are concerned, well, you know, we're talking different cities that are sort of 8 hours apart, so there's not going to be much overlapping there. Trainers, well, you know, they can have their representatives in either city. I guess the most inconvenienced participants are jockeys. They physically can only ride in one location. So they have to make decisions as to, you know, which major race they elect to ride in.
What's the importance for you of the 5 million Australian dollars King Charles III stakes in the racing industry?
It's the latest innovative race, and putting $5 million on a Group 1 race is a really good idea, I think. I'm a big fan of races for older horses. where horses that with longevity can compete in them. And this King Charles Stakes, yes, a 3-year-old could compete in it by all means, but rewarding races for older horses, I think, is a step in the right direction, because it'll encourage people to race horses for longer and not just rush them off to stud, which has been the sort of trend in the last 25, 30 years.
Great. Thank
I just want to have a horse good enough to compete in it.
All right, Jamie, last question. But before I go to that, I hope everyone is enjoying this. And please don't forget to share comments, like the video, and of course, subscribe to the channel 10 Furlongs Magazine. Now, Jamie, last question for you. So obviously, horse racing is a thrilling and challenging business for you, for a lot of people, definitely. Could you share with us, a memorable experience or an instance of triumph or setback that really influenced your approach as a syndicate principal?
Oh, that's a very good question, Aurelian. Look, there's probably not one specific instance, because most things in racing are gradual. You know, for our business to have got where it is today, it's far from an overnight success. There's many, many years of toil and mistakes that have evolved into our recent success. But one thing I would cite, there was a bloodstock agent and a very good friend of mine who sadly passed away about 4 or 5 years ago. He was from New Zealand and his name was Steve Brem. And he was a very astute man, very knowledgeable, taught me a lot. And Proven Thoroughbreds has been going about 20 years, and about 6 or 8 years ago, we were getting winners, but we weren't getting quality winners. So I sought Steve's advice, knowing what an astute bloke he was, and having a lot of respect for his opinion. And he said, well, I would buy better quality horses, spend more money, which we have done. And ironically, our 2 best horses are still relatively cheap. But we did buy a very expensive filly a couple of years ago called Stroll, who was 450,000. And she's been successful, so she's probably worth 7 figures now. So it was, that's just one example, but Steve's advice was right on the money, I think.
It's very good advice.
The flip side of that is I could say, well, it's easy for you to say, to go and spend.
Obviously.
I have to find the money to spend.
Thank you so much, Jamie, for this interview today. Thank you for being here.
Absolute pleasure, Aurelian, and thank you very much for having me.
Thank you. Have a nice rest of your day.
You too.